Okay. For the audience that does not know you, feel free to introduce yourself.
So my name is Laura. I am a physical therapist and trainer, and I kind of specialize in I include a ton of different approaches into my fitness. So I combine like calisthenics, traditional weightlifting. I incorporate some kettlebell stuff, mobility training, hand balancing, all that kind of thing. So I kind of just have a different approach, combining a ton of different modalities instead of just sticking to one.
So I found you through Instagram, and you run a relatively big account. So talk to me about the account. How did you get such a big account? Like, why do people want to look at you as a physical therapist? Why not all the other hundreds of thousands of physical therapists that are out there?
Yeah, so that is a great question, and I am not exactly sure, but basically I started the account anonymously, actually, which is why I don't have my name in my handle. And I started it when I was in PT school, and basically I had previously had retired from gymnastics because I competed in college, and it was kind of like a weird limbo time of my life where it was kind of like gymnastics was my identity, and I was kind of searching for myself again, essentially. And I stumbled across calisthenics online through Instagram, and I was like, oh my goodness, that is what I was missing. Kind of started including a little bit of it into my workouts, and just kind of fell back in love with that style of training. Added a little hand balancing, added a little bit of other things, and it kind of have just evolved from there. But the way that, it kind of sounds a little bit dramatic, but like the way my life's changed and like the way my view of myself changed with including the calisthenics again, it made me feel a lot better, a lot more confident and things like that. So I was like, if posting my workouts online makes a difference for one other person, then that makes it worth it. So regardless of how much of a fool I am of myself for posting these online, it makes a difference. So that's why I started the page in general, and it's just kind of grown and evolved over the years from there. So it's a combination of like my own workouts and just like fun, stupid things, because it's important to have fun, and then more the educational stuff as I've grown professionally.
So that was never your intention. That's interesting. So it was never your intention to grow this big account. It just kind of happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so like with that being said, how did that affect like your own journey? Like, did you ever look up, wake up? Was it like a wake up one day and you're like, whoa, like, I have so much? Or is it like, over the course of months and years, it just slowly accumulated?
Yeah, it's been a slow and steady growth over the years. So I feel like my mentality has been able to adapt. And the more that I grow, the more that you realize that the numbers, yes, they represent a human, but they don't mean as much as people think. And so I'm still just an average person in my head, and who just happens to have a little bit of an audience for my workouts, I guess. But I'm still the same as anyone down the street, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, how has it affected your business? Like, how many people are now calling and messaging and emailing you every day now that you have that following?
Yeah. So obviously I've had some pretty fun and amazing opportunities through this. And I've been able to start my own business. I mean, that wasn't necessarily always my intention. It was just more because people were asking me for it. I was like, oh, I guess I should probably do this. And I really I found my passion that way as well, because not only am I still treating people in the clinic with physical therapy, I can also translate it more online and more from an injury prevention standpoint. And that's where my true passion is from, because I want to prevent the injuries versus just see them after the fact. So that's where I'm able to kind of take the audience and help people that way. And then also just help people move better, do more fun things, improve their quality of life that way. So yes, the platform has allowed me to do those things. And then I've also been able to travel and coach different, I've coached a camp or a couple in-person events. I've been able to meet some really cool people as well. So all of that has happened through the platform.
Why did you become a physical therapist? And all of this, Like what inspired you to wake up one day and you say, oh, I got to become a physical therapist. I want to help people with their injuries and prevent their injuries.
Yeah, so I grew up doing gymnastics again, and I always found it very interesting that the way the human body moved. I remember I don't remember how old I was, but I was maybe like middle school, high school time, and I somehow intuitively knew that like chin-ups biased your biceps more. I have no idea where I learned that from, but like I just kind of figured that out, I guess, or maybe I was told that and it like stuck. But I originally was planning on doing engineering, and then I took calculus in high school, and I was like, that's funny, I'm never taking a math again. And so I just started looking into different careers and then ended up shadowing a physical therapist, and I was like, yeah, I can see myself doing that. And it was just more the interest in the way the human body moved, and that like every person is different. So every treatment session isn't going to look the same either. So the variety in that intrigued me. Oh, I think the audio cut out.
No, sorry, I didn't have my mic on.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, so did you ever get injured during gymnastics, and did that ever like partly inspire that?
So I was actually very lucky when it came to injuries in gymnastics. I had a couple of broken bones, but I never actually like had to go to PT or anything like that for it. It wasn't actually until after retiring and when I was a physical therapist that I had to go to physical therapy because I needed surgery on my shoulder. So that was an interesting experience, but that was after the fact.
So, when you're talking about how the fact that, you never really got injured, but you've seen plenty of people get injured. What's the worst injury that you've seen people get?
For gymnastics or generally speaking?
Yeah, in general, like what's the worst injury you've ever seen? And how did you treat it?
So I've honestly, let's see, it's hard to say. I mean, the first thing that pops into my mind is one of my good friends is also a physical therapist, and she's more in the neuro realm. So she sees a ton of like traumatic brain injuries and spinal cord injuries and all of those types of things. And so those are probably like the worst injury. Like you see, I'm trying to think, like a therapist that I used to work with, he saw like a pelvic fracture. Actually, no, I've seen a pelvic fracture as well. And so those are pretty intense because all of your stability is in your core and all of those muscles attached there. So those are pretty interesting. But the thing is, like, you can have crazy neuro complications. It can be a straight ortho thing. It's really hard to say which one, I guess, is the worst. So.
Well, what do you think the weirdest one is? Because doctors and physical therapists definitely see I feel like they would see some interesting injuries all the time, especially like, more like the emergency stuff, like ER especially. But like, what do you think was like the most weird, unusual thing that stuck out to you? You're like, why? How did this happen? Like, why did this person get injured this way? Or you knew why and it was an interesting reason?
I'm trying to think of. I'm trying, because like the one person that pops into my head, it was like a developmental, but it had some like weird complications with it. So like, is it more like neurological? Is there a vascular component to it? So we're still trying to kind of tease that out. Yes, there is the muscular component, which we've been able to kind of improve a little bit, but that one's a pretty challenging one, and just interesting. Other ones, a lot of times, like you'll get a script from a doctor because, like in the U.S., you have to have a script from a doctor. Well, depending on the state, actually, because you can see them direct access, so it's a little nuanced. But eventually, you will need a script, at least in the state where I practice. And so, a lot of times on those scripts, you'll see something different than what it actually is. So like you might see back, but it's actually like the hip, or you might see like lumbar radiculopathy and it's like something completely different. So it's kind of interesting just to tease out and figure out what exactly. It's a little bit of like a puzzle piece that you have to kind of figure out to actually provide the treatment plan and get them better. So like I had one person, I think the script was for like lumbar radiculopathy. And so I was like, kind of seems potentially femoral nerve-like, which is like the front of the hip. Whereas like more stereotypical like lumbar radic would be like sciatica type situation, like going down the back of the leg. But it was actually more hip joint related for that person. So it was kind of like trying to tease that out and figure that out. And then like, are they making progress along the way? And if they're not, then you need to adjust your treatment approach to make sure they're continuing to make progress as well.
What's the most common reason that people get injured, especially from playing sports or, weightlifting, or like just in general, actually, what's the most common reason people get injured?
I would potentially, it's hard to say. I mean, the most common thing that we see are like necks and backs. And just statistically, those are commonly areas that people have pain. But I think it's more like lifestyle related, not necessarily gym related, because you have to consider the bulk of the population isn't super active in the first place. So I think that's the issue, is that not enough people are actually moving. And then, so that's going to be the number one thing. With people who are moving, it's going to be, are they balancing like the load and their recovery? And are they doing things with proper form and including enough variety, but also repeating movement patterns so they can make progress? So it's definitely multifactorial.
So when you're mentioning lifestyle, right, I got to ask about posture, right? How important really is posture and sitting up straight?
So honestly, it doesn't matter as much as people think. Really, there's no one ideal posture. Your next posture is typically your best posture, aka it's better to move and have a variety of positions that you sit in throughout the day. So sitting in one position, regardless of that position, is not good. So even if you were sitting in the quote unquote ideal posture all day, that's still not a good thing. So like if you can, sit for a little bit, stand for a little bit, kneel for a little bit, lay on your stomach for a bit, things like that throughout the day, and adjusting your posture throughout the day is going to be the most beneficial. If that makes sense.
Thoughts on standing desks?
I personally like them because it allows you some more variety. So I personally have one that goes all the way down to the floor. So I'm sitting on the floor right now, and so I'll like kneel sometimes, I will stand sometimes. So it just gives a lot more variety that you can pull from while staying in the same physical location versus like having to bring your computer over somewhere else.
So let's say a person does have back pain, right? Hypothetically. Which a lot of people do, especially if they're older. Right. What's the best way to treat that? Right. Just at home, how are you going to treat that? Right. Approach that. Because a lot of people have back pain. My dad has back pain, chances are if you have, parents as well, they have back pain. It's not that uncommon. So how do you deal with back pain?
So it's going to be on an individual basis because not everyone with back pain is going to present the same way. Some people might feel better bending forward. Some people that might aggravate their symptoms. So it's going to be dependent on what they're actually experiencing. Sometimes you can get pain referred from a different area. So like your hip muscle can refer up to your back and like your back can kind of refer into the hip. So you have to check out the hip as well. And then your hip flexor is also attached to your spine. So are your hip flexors also involved? And a lot of people think it's just like core strengthening, but there's a ton more factors that go into it. And oftentimes that's not necessarily the main thing. It's more an aspect of like the mobility in the spine and the hips, and then the strength of the hips and the coordination of everything. But the specific exercises are going to be dependent on the presentation because everyone is a little bit different there.
What is the most common reason that people have back pain? Because I know you mentioned you like to prevent injuries. So let's say I don't want to have back pain. What's the best thing I could do to prevent that?
Making sure your back and hips are moving well and that you have strength in all of the different movement patterns. So making sure the sides of your hip. are strong, because that's an often thing that's neglected in people's training. They don't necessarily move side to side. So that's a common thing. It's like, make sure you're good there. And then also like making sure you're able, a lot of people will train just in like a straight spine. And yes, you want to master the basics that way, but you also want to be able to move and lift, not necessarily in that neutral spine, because when you're picking like your grandkid off the ground, for example, you're not going to be like doing that in a specific way like you would when you're lifting. Or like if you're helping a friend move a couch, you're typically not necessarily going to be using that same posture because it's a weird object, right? So making sure you're able to do those things to help with life as well. So it's an aspect of including that variety in your training so you can do those things.
Moving on from, well, this is something funny I saw. When I saw your page, there's three mutual followers of people that I follow that follow you. There's one in particular that was really funny to me. Greg Paul. Logan Paul's dad follows you on Instagram. I don't know if you knew that, but I just wanted to
No,
tell
I
you.
did not.
Oh yeah, no. So Greg Paul, Logan Paul's dad, I saw. I was like, why does he follow her on Instagram? I thought that was funny. So now you know. But you actually, this might be a good transition. So you're talking about opportunities that kind of came from social media. What were some of those opportunities?
So I was able to coach a strength training camp in Bali. So that was a really cool experience. I was able to, model for Free People Movement, which was really cool as well. And just the connections that I've been able to do and create through this. So I've like had people, others in the industry come over, and it's just like hanging out, collaborating. And it's really creating that community. That's been really cool. And then like I've also been able to like, it was more of like I was on a panel, I guess, at an event as well. So that was a cool experience too. So just every once in a while getting out there in the real world and making those connections are more the opportunities as well.
So moving back into the pain and to the fun and not fun stuff of how to prevent pain. So what about knee pain, right? Because we all know the infamous, as soon as a man turns 18, his knees are gonna start cracking, and he's gonna make a moan every time he gets up. So number one, why do your knees crack? I want to ask that every time you.
Yeah, so it depends on the type of crack, right? A lot of times, if it's like, your knuckles pop, that's just air bubbles being released from the joint, and it's nothing to worry about. You can also have, like, as long as it's not painful, if your body makes a sound, it's perfectly fine. If it's painful, it's a different story. So there are a couple different types of pops that you can get, but typically most common is like the knuckle popping, and that's just air bubbles.
So how do you feel about cracking joints in general? I've heard mixed sources. So
you can, it's fine. My body makes a ton of different sounds while I'm working out. But basically you can also, yes, it's perfectly fine. The only caveat I would say to that is you can actually become addicted to it, because it actually releases, it's like the chemical release. And so if you feel like you have to pop something, then that's where it becomes like an issue, if that makes sense. So if you're repeatedly having to do this to make this feel good, and there's no other way necessarily to get that, then that's potentially, like, you have to kind of dive deeper into why. But typically, for most people, no issues with popping things.
So what do you mean the chemical release? So like dope, like what's going on?
I forget what it was off the top of my head right now, but basically it releases like a chemical that it's basically like, it makes you feel good, makes you like basically that chemical can be addictive to your brain with that release. And it's not necessarily the pop, it's the release of the chemicals, if that makes sense, like with it.
So so it's not necessarily a good way to relieve pain because it's mitigating the symptoms.
No, so you can actually use it. You can use it as like a little bit of a permission slip, because there are techniques where you can basically like pop your joint or create a cavitation. And with those quick stretches, it causes a neurophysiological response where it kind of almost like does a little bit of a mini reset and can help you. It's like a little bit of a permission slip to get you to move into more of a range. And then you can follow that up with exercise to help it stick. But if you do that, just the popping by itself, or just that quick stretch by itself, that's not necessarily going to create long-term effects. So you can use that as a little permission slip to get even more out of the exercises. So there is a benefit to it at times as well.
So how often, so here's a question. So cracking your neck, right? That's one that I always felt I feel it's like very nerve-wracking, like to do, right? Because, it's your neck, right? Like that's like right at your spine. So at what point is it like, is that something like you should worry about? Like if people do crack their necks, like that specific one has always made me a little worried.
So again, with a trained person doing it, it's perfectly safe. And the risk actually with like a physical therapist doing it is actually fairly low, because we're specific with what we're doing. So if you're with a trained person who's specific and targeting what they need to target, then the risk is actually pretty low. I want to say NSAIDs like ibuprofen and things like that have a higher risk than having your neck popped by someone who's trained and specific.
Long-term speaking, right? So running. So a lot of people run and a lot of people develop issues later on in life because of running, right? Especially in their knees. So with that being said, 10 people run at all? Like, is that good for you? Like, is it bad for you? Because most people that go for long runs, they end up, always years later developing these horrible, horrible pains. It can't, it's terrible to walk and do anything. So at what point is running okay? What point is it not okay? Is it healthy? Is it the best form of cardio long term?
So I would say, yes, it's perfectly safe to run. Anything taken to any extreme can cause negative effects. I mean, you can die of drinking water. So, I mean, anything in that regard, like, yes, taking to extreme the risk reward ratio might not be in your favor, if that makes sense. A lot of runners, though, don't necessarily strength train as well. And running is a repetitive movement, kind of like just sitting in one position for a long time. You're repeating the same movement over and over and over again. And if you're not actually strengthening to help support that, then that's when you can get the issues. So running is a lot of forward and backward movement. We kind of talked about the side to side motions, and including that would be really helpful, because that's going to help stabilize the pelvis. And then the knee is oftentimes, it's basically like a little innocent victim between like the foot and the ankle and the hip. So oftentimes whatever's happening at that, the knee is going to follow, and that can change the stress. So making sure the hips are nice and strong is going to play a huge role. So including some strength training to help with the running, and that should help reduce the risk of injury as well.
Stretching. Let's talk about stretching. Should a person stretch before or after physical activity?
So if power is their main goal, I would definitely more lean towards after. But depending on person to person, like I have done stretches before working out, and I have, instructed people to. Typically, I'll do mobility stuff, so a little bit more active stretching, active movement to loosen up beforehand, and then more of the passive stretching after is the general rule of thumb.
Well, so what does stretching exactly do? Because that's something I've also wondered. Because some people say it just relaxes your muscles. Other, people say it's great for it is great for flexibility. But what exactly is happening to your body when you're stretching? Why am I not as flexible, maybe like sitting down right now, as I would be after I stretch? What am I doing? What's happening in my body?
So you're just generally loosening up the muscles and the tissues, essentially. Like you'll notice that you can, even after like you do just a general like cardio warm up, or like even if you stretch when it's hot outside versus when it's cold outside, you'll notice that you're able to move a little bit more. It's also allowing your brain to get more comfortable in those longer positions. And so doing those stretches can help loosen things up. And then it can also be just like, hey, it's okay to like allow your body to get into this position so you can get that response from your muscles. You're not necessarily like lengthening anything, but you're just allowing yourself to access those ranges with the stretching.
So with that being said, why do I sometimes feel sore after I stretch? Right? If I'm like really stretching, like really going like let's say my hamstrings, especially like for me, if I like kick my leg really high or like I really like stretch it out, it does get sore. So why is it getting sore? Is it the same way as like a muscle? Like, like I'm growing more muscle fibers, like so to speak, like what's happening?
So it depends. If it's more of a dynamic thing, like a kick, it might have just gone a little bit farther than what your body's comfortable with, and it's more of a protective response. If it's like part of your training, it can be similar to when you're strength training, not necessarily like you're like growing like new or like you're. It's similar in some ways and then different in others. It's like, yes, some soreness after can be okay, but it's when it gets to like the non-productive soreness, that's when you should probably actually back off and kind of ease into it a little bit more, and that will help you get more in the long run. So definitely, like, yes, you can get sore after you stretch, but no, it's not necessarily anything to worry about unless it's too much, kind of similar to the strength training aspect of it. That.
For recovery, how do you feel about cold showers and things like that?
From a recovery standpoint, it's not necessarily needed. I mean, the vast majority of the recovery and the most important things that are going to get the most bang for your buck are going to be the more simple things, and simple meaning those are the foundational things, not they're simple to actually implement. So it's going to be like, are you actually sleeping enough? Are you drinking enough water? Is your nutrition, like, are you getting enough protein? Are you fueling your body appropriately? Are you getting enough overall calories and things like that? And then your volume management of your training. So like, are you working out at an appropriate volume for where you're at this point? Are you, like loading, are you using the appropriate weight in your sessions and things like that? And all of those things together are going to make a bigger impact versus taking a cold shower.
All right, and I think for for one of the last questions I'm going to ask, it's a little bit early, but I got through all my questions. So, what advice would you give to young people?
Find what you enjoy when it comes to movement, and listen to your body with it, and have fun, to be honest, because that's going to be the thing that's going to keep you moving for longer, and the consistency over time is going to be the most important versus whatever you're doing, if that makes sense. So have fun with it, find something that you enjoy, and stay moving as long as you can.
All right, sounds good. All right, any final words to the audience?
Don't think so.
All right, in 3, 2, 1.